Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today is part 2 of my tech tree preview of all of the new Swedish tanks that just hit the 917 test server. Yesterday I showed you all of the brand new tank destroyers. Today I'm going to show you the mixed branch of 3 light tanks, 4 medium tanks, and 3 top tier heavy autoloaders. Let's get started. So just like the tank destroyer branch that you see at the top of your screen, the mixed branch stems from the Stridsvagn FM21, a tier 1 light tank. And as I mentioned yesterday, this tank is just absolutely ridiculous. It's an interwar tank between World War I and World War II, so I guess they were still perfecting the art. And it does look like a bit of a stinker to start off the tree. It's got 14mm of all-round armor, although as we saw in the tank destroyers yesterday, that isn't too bad compared to what some of the high tier tank destroyers have. And it has a gun which is a bit like the old school gun on the T10 Kranvagn, which they have since removed. One thing that is nice about the Stridsvagn FM21 is that it does have 10 degrees of gun depression, but whether that continues through the tree, we're just going to have to find out. So next up in the line is the Stridsvagn M38, and wow, this thing starts to look a lot more like a tank than the previous vehicle, hey, immediately at tier 2. The tank was developed on the basis of the L60 light tank by the Landsverk AB company. During mass production, the vehicle underwent several modernizations. A total of 216 vehicles of different variants were produced from 1939 through to 1944, and the vehicle remained in service in the Swedish Army until the 1960s. So what are the highlights of this tier 2 Swedish light tank? Well, it's certainly not the specific power. 17.5 is not great for a light tank. And also the vehicle is limited to 45 kilometers an hour forwards and 18 kilometers an hour backwards. That is certainly a lot more like a medium. And moreover, it doesn't really have any armor. 13mm at the front, side and rear, and 15 on the front of the turret, 13 on the side of the turret, and 13 on the rear of the turret, so you're not going to be able to ricochet that many rounds. The view range, however, is nice for tier 2. 300 meters view range. When you start to get binoculars on that and you get a bit of passive scouting going, you are certainly going to be able to light up the enemy. But what is impressive on this tank is the dramatic amount of gun depression that it has. Look at this, 15 degrees of gun depression with its 37mm main armament. And this certainly is a great gun at tier 2. 1.8 seconds aim time, 0.42 accuracy, not so good there, but decent penetration at 55mm and 40 alpha damage and a great rate of fire. This thing is going to play a lot like the low tier British light tanks or the mid tier British medium tanks. Not the fastest, but with great gun depression and able to work ridges. Next up at tier 3, it's the final light tank in this branch, and it's the Stridsvagn M40L. And yes, the tank is pretty much identical, as we can see here, between the tier 2 and the tier 3. So what advantages does the tier 3 have over the tier 2? Well, it's certainly not the alpha damage, because these both use 37mm main armaments. But everything else about this 37mm is better. More penetration, faster rate of fire, lower aim time, better accuracy, thus better DPM, while still maintaining the awesome 15 degrees of gun depression that the M38 had. Also, the vehicle's hit points has gone up by 50, and it also has some armor at the front of the tank. Look at that, 48mm at the front and 50 on the turret. This thing can actually pull off a ricochet. Luckily, however, this extra armor hasn't affected the mobility of the tank because it has more horsepower per ton, giving it a better specific power ratio while maintaining the mediocre top speed and reverse speeds of this tank with a decent traverse speed and 20 meters extra armor. So pretty much exactly the same as what you would have been getting at tier 2, just an upgraded version of the tank. Next up, we're changing from light tank to medium tank. It is the Largo. And this thing certainly does look like it's been eating a few meatballs over the tier 3 light tank. This thing reminds me of the turret that you would see on a Soviet T-26. And the story behind it is that it was developed in 1936 by the Landsverk company. The new vehicle incorporated some elements of the L60 light tank. In 1939, Hungary took interest in the project, but by the time the first prototype was produced in 1940, Hungary decided to develop their own medium tank on the basis of the Skoda T21. Later, some technical solutions were applied in the development of the Stridsvagn M42 tank, which is the tier 6 premium, I guess. And yeah, when we take a look at the tier 6 premium, we can see how the hulls are practically identical between the vehicles. So what is there to look forward to with the first Swedish medium tank along this branch? Well, it still has okay gun depression for a Swedish tank, 10 degrees, and a choice of 2 competitive guns to use. You can either use this 7.5cm gun or you can use this 57mm gun. I would personally use the 57mm as it has a much better rate of fire, better penetration, however lower alpha damage, better accuracy, and better aim time. The hit points of the vehicle is 350. That's pretty standard for tier 4. It should be able to maybe enable you to take at least one shot. The vehicle doesn't have much armor, however, 34mm at the front, side, and 24 at the back. That's less than the tier 3 light tank when we take it into consideration. And the vehicle's specific power is just over 17.5. That's pretty okay for a medium tank, and the vehicle is limited to that kind of medium tank top speed limit of 45 kilometers an hour. That's a pretty slow medium tank when we think about it, actually, and 18 kilometers an hour backwards. So all in all, certainly a very generic looking tier 4 medium tank here. Let's see what happens when we hit tier 5, and oh my word, that certainly looks a little different. This is the Stridsvagn M42, which I guess is the same hull as the tier 6 premium, but just with a different turret. So now at tier 5, the 75mm gun becomes more competitive. And when we compare this, for example, against the top gun on the Panzer IV, we can see that the Swedish tank doesn't have the best rate of fire. In fact, it's over 33% worse than the Panzer IV. And when we compare this 75mm to comparable guns, for example, on the Panzer IV, we can see that this thing hits harder. The Panzer IV does 110 average damage per shot, whereas this has a meaty 150 alpha damage, and it's still got good penetration, 115 compared to the 110 on the Panzer IV, while also having better accuracy and only slightly worse aim time. That makes the gun on the M42 quite competitive for tier 5, and when we also look at the gun depression, which is a mighty 15 degrees, I can imagine this thing is going to be a monster on ridgelines. While the vehicle has more armor than its tier 4 counterpart, the Lago, it certainly isn't very thick. 55mm at the front, 30 at the side, and 20 at the rear, and 55 on the turret, 30 on the side of the turret, and 20 on the rear of the turret. So this thing isn't really going to be pulling off many bounces at tier 5, but its mobility is decent, a specific power of over 18 with again 45 kilometers an hour forwards and this time 20 backwards, and an excellent track traverse of 46 degrees a second should make this very mobile up to that limited top speed limit. Also, one nice thing about this tank is this big meaty old turret gets 350 meters view range, so you should start to be able to spot your opponents, but it's still definitely recommended to take binoculars on this vehicle. So goodbye tier 5, let's see what happens at tier 6, and what the hell? This looks like a Chaffee slash a T37 that hasn't been to McDonald's in a while. It's so tall and so thin, so Viking, so Scandinavian. This thing looks like it could be awesome, but let's see if the statistics hold up to the looks. It is called the Stridsvagn 74. So let's take a quick look at the history of the vehicle. In the early 1950s, the Centurion medium tank entered service in the Swedish army, yet a lighter, more maneuverable vehicle was required. It was decided to modernize the old Stridsvagn M42 by equipping them with a new turret and armament. The tank received a new name, the Stridsvagn 74. A total of 225 vehicles were manufactured from 1957 through to 1960. The Swedish army continued to use the vehicle up until the end of 1984. Wow. So this vehicle has a 75mm, which is pretty much the same as the Stridsvagn M4257's autoloader. It's just not going to be having a magazine. But the best way to see if this gun is going to be competitive is to compare it to probably the best in class at tier 6, which is going to be a Cromwell. So can the Swedish 75 hold up against the Cromwell 75? Well, it has an alpha damage advantage of 150 compared to 135 on the Cromwell, but it does lack a little bit of the rate of fire, but an advantage in the penetration on its standard rounds, but a disadvantage on the APCR rounds. But it is so much more accurate, 0.33 accuracy compared to 0.36 on the Cromwell, and 1.8 seconds aim time compared to 2.3. That should make this thing quite flexible for pulling off snapshots on ridgelines. And wow, it maintains the 15 degrees of best in class gun depression. This thing looks like it could be a real treat at tier 6. And really, it's only the DPM that suffers. But how about the armor of the tank? 55 at the front of the hull, 30 at the side of the hull, and 20 at the rear of the hull. But the turret really sucks, 20mm all round. You gotta hope that your angles are going to hold up. And the top speed limit is limited, a lot like on the Stridsvagn M4257, to 45 kilometers an hour forwards, 18 kilometers an hour backwards, and your specific power, oh god, please say that that's wrong. Oh no, it isn't. Its specific power is 13. Oh god, this thing is going to be a very slow medium at tier 6. That is so disappointing that it doesn't have a better horsepower in its engine. So I guess you're going to have to be certainly careful where you take this vehicle because you're not going to be leaving very quickly. But I can imagine when you get there with 360 meters view range and a gun with 15 degrees of gun depression and decent statistics for a tier 6 tank, you are going to hold the ridgeline like a total boss. So what have we got to look forward to at tier 7 when we play the Leo? Oh my word. So it's gone from a Chaffee that never goes to McDonald's with its strong Viking heritage to an RU-251 Speerpanzer that has pretty much feasted on every single menu there is. So what is the history of the Leo? So in the late 1940s, Landsverk developed a series of tanks that were primarily intended for export. The Stridsvagn Leo medium tank was the heaviest in the series. The army took interest in the project, but it did not offer considerable advantages over foreign peers that were available for purchase. Eventually, they favored another project. So the Leo is interesting because there is a choice of 2 guns on the vehicle, the same 75mm that you will be accustomed to now, or alternatively, a unique gun for the Leo tank, this 105mm main armament. Now, this gun doesn't have the best rate of fire at just over 5 rounds a minute, but it has 300 alpha damage. That is fantastic for a tier 7 tank. That would be amazing for a tier 8 medium tank. And it's not really until you get to tier 9 that you start seeing that alpha damage, especially with 10 degrees of gun depression. The accuracy of this 105mm is not great, however, at 0.42, and 3 seconds aim time is made even more disappointing by the fact that this tank, for some reason, cannot use vertical stabilizers. Furthermore, the vehicle's view range is not amazing for a tier 7 medium at 370 meters, which means that I think you'd be hard pressed to drop out vents or coated optics on this tank to use a gun laying drive to try and mitigate that 3 seconds of aim time. Nevertheless, the vehicle's armor is starting to get better, 70mm, and it's well angled. If you're using your 10 degrees of gun depression, your hull should be able to pull off some ricochets. However, the turret armor is fat and flat at 70mm, and so you've certainly got to watch out for that. However, unlike the Stridsvagn 74, which looks like it should be the vastly more agile tank, with a low top speed limit of 45 km an hour and 13 specific power ratio, the Leo gets a whopping specific power ratio of over 25, and it goes at 60 km an hour forwards and 20 backwards, which makes this thing ludicrously fast, a bit more like a high tier light tank than a tier 7 medium tank. And so this is certainly something to watch out for, and I think this is going to become one of my favorite vehicles along the branch. And it also marks the end of the Swedish medium tanks, because now when we take a look at the tier 8 tank, it is going to be a heavy. And boy, what a heavy this is. That looks absolutely ridiculous. This is the Emil 1, and it is a variant of a heavy tank developed in the Swedish army under the Emil project in the 1950s. Design solutions used for the French AMX-13 tank influenced the project. Yeah, we can definitely see that this looks like a French autoloader. In 1951, a draft design was prepared, but development was discontinued in favor of latter versions. So what is special about this tank? Well, it has an autoloader, and boy, what an autoloader this is. 105mm autoloader at tier 8 with 320 alpha damage, 217mm of penetration on its standard rounds, and 4 rounds in the magazine. Unfortunately, the vehicle's accuracy is not excellent at 0.38, and the aim time at 3.2 seconds is rather long, but this is a monstrous gun that kind of competes with the AMX 5100 and the American T69. One thing that should be mentioned about this tank is that while it's a heavy, it's actually incredibly small. Here, for example, is the AMX 5100, a tier 8 French autoloader, which this tank is undoubtedly going to compete with, and just take a look how much smaller the Emil is. It's absolutely crazy how tiny this tank is. And what makes this tank even more sweeter is that it has 12 degrees of gun depression, guys. That is the highest gun depression on any high tier heavy tank ever in World of Tanks. And so that means that you can point your gun so far down that you will be able to angle your turret like a complete boss. And the turret armor on this tank at the front is 180mm thick. If you go hull down, I don't think you really have any weak points if the Emil is pointing his gun directly towards you, making this tank an absolute dream in a hull down ridgeline war. Furthermore, the top speed limit of this tank is not bad at 50 km an hour. That is a fast heavy, and it goes at 16 backwards. And it has a decent engine with a specific power of over 15 to be able to get it there. This thing looks like an absolute monster at tier 8, and a lot like in the Tank Destroyer tech tree, I really feel that Swedish tanks come into their own once they hit their tier 8 stride. At tier 9, the Emil becomes the Emil 2. Slightly larger, and this tank looks a hell of a lot like an AMX 5120, right? So what advantages does the bigger Swedish brother have? Well, it now uses 120mm main armament with 400 average damage over the 320 of the Emil, but it still has 4 rounds in each magazine, but still maintains the 3 seconds delay between each of those shots firing. Again, fantastic gun depression of -12 degrees, better aim time on a larger gun, the same accuracy, while the time for a complete loading of the magazine has only gone up by 3 seconds, giving this tank a certain DPM advantage over the Emil 1. The tank is also much more heavily armored, 100mm still at the front of the hull, but your side armor has tripled, and your turret armor has gone from 180 to 215 at the front and 60 at the side. While the vehicle's got a much more powerful engine, giving it a better specific power ratio, its top speed limit has also increased both forwards and backwards, and the vehicle has 20 extra meters view range. Wow, this thing looks like an absolute beast at tier 9, and if you manage to get hull down on a ridgeline, you are going to be a very well-armored autoloader. So ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, let's take a look at the ultimate Swedish tank down the heavy tech tree. You are looking at the Kranvagn. Again, it's slightly larger than the Emil 2 as we can see here, and it uses the same 120mm main armament. But the gun performs so much better on the daddy tank. Its rate of fire has gone up dramatically, giving this vehicle 2,700 DPM compared to the 2,000 that the Emil 2 had. Also, this tank maintains that fantastic 12 degrees of gun depression while also improving over the turret traverse of the previous two Swedish Heavies. The aim time has also gone down from 2.68 down to 2.4 seconds. The hit points of the tank has also increased from 1,700 to 2,000, although that's not that much for a tier 10 heavy. But all round the armor of the tank has got 10mm thicker, making this one of the best turrets in the game, no doubt, if you are using your gun depression. 215mm of frontal turret armor makes this thing an absolute beast. Furthermore, the Kranvagn doesn't really lack any of the mobility that you may have been accustomed to with these Swedish Heavies. In fact, it's got a better specific power ratio. Its top speed limit has gone up from 56 to 60 kilometers an hour, and it maintains a 31 degrees a second traverse speed, which isn't too bad. So let's take a look at the history of the Kranvagn. It seems to be a bit of a mysterious vehicle, a project for a new vehicle for the Swedish Army that started in 1949. For confidentiality purposes, the vehicle was given an unusual name, the KRV, which stands for Self-Propelled Crane in Swedish. The project was based on the French AMX-50. No surprise there. A lightweight chassis was built and tested. In addition, a dummy with a turret was produced. A prototype was never built. And I can confirm, guys, that the Kranvagn is an absolute beast on the battlefield, having played it yesterday. And stay tuned to the channel because later today I'm going to be giving you a full analysis of the Kranvagn, how it stacks up compared to the T57 Heavy and the AMX-50B, and also showcase some awesome gameplay in this tank, and you will be amazed when you see what this turret is capable of. And so hopefully this tech tree preview was useful for you, or maybe you just enjoyed it. If you did, please consider giving the video a like. It really helps the channel out, and stay tuned because I've got so much content coming out today and over the upcoming days on everything that is Swedish and patch 9.17. And let me know in the comments down below what you think about this mixed branch of Swedish tanks. Do you think some of them look awesome? Which ones can you not wait to get your hands on? Which ones do you think you're going to try and avoid playing as much as possible? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.